Since I spoke last, I joined the Sons of Union Veterans of the Civil War. What are they? After the Civil War, the men who fought formed Grand Army of the Republic chapters everywhere. There was even in Searsport a McGilvery chapter. But I'm not sure, they might have been a little short-sighted because you had to have fought in the Civil War to be a member. And when the last one died, GAR is gone. What we are is a congressionally approved successor, Sons of Union Veterans of the Civil War. That doesn't mean we inherited all of the monuments, but to some extent we're responsible for them. With us tonight is Steve Gibbons, our secretary of the Rockport chapter. And I say Rockport because that's where we meet. We're the southernmost chapter in Maine. So it definitely encompasses Waldo and Knox County, but much more unless we get more chapters going. One of the projects that I was most interested in, to be an SUVCW member, you have to have a great-great-grandfather or some other relative who served in the Civil War, and you need to prove it, just like DAR and GAR does for the Revolution. And being a brand new chapter, we got lucky. We were able to make our own rules within limits. We decided the focus of the group would be to have fun learning something. So we have a program every meeting and not just a military regimentation. But the job I asked for and got was a grave registration officer. And what that amounts to, I'm going to be telling you tonight about a Stockton man, Albert Richardson, who late in the war went into the Coast Guard infantry, just like any other infantry, but they called it Coast Guard. And when he got done with the war in 1865, thank you, he was a seaman by trade, and he took off to New York. He got married in Massachusetts, took off for New York, got on a ship, and that's the story I'm going to tell you. But my job tonight, before I came, was to put him in a national database. Now, there's databases everywhere: Ancestry, Family Search, and Find a Grave, which we've spoken about before. The difference with this database is if you're looking for a common name like Charlie Smith, and you know that I was in Company A of the 13th Maine Infantry, you can find me by searching that regiment. And that's a strong advantage when you're doing genealogy. There's 26 national grave registration officers. 2 of us are in the room. 26 around the country, and 3 of them are from Maine. 1 in Lincoln. Steve Gibbons, say hi, stand up, show your uniform. He's down in Camden, and then myself. As soon as we signed up, they assigned me the state of Maryland. 77,000 men served from Maine, and they gave me Maryland. Felt like I was back in the military again. And so anytime somebody refers a Maryland burial to the Sons, I get it. But I'd pull a sneaky Pete, and I work way more on Maine burials than I do Maryland. First, I'm going to tell you a little bit about one Searsport man who happens to be one of the 4 great-great-grandfathers of mine that served in the Civil War. We all got 8 great-great-grandfathers. Everybody on my mother's side served. Nobody on my dad's side served. Dad's side, one had already died, and the others were totally the wrong age. But on Mom's side, everybody was prime to go to war. And we had one Searsport man, Robert Morrow, 2 Stockton men, Henry Moulton and William Ellis, and then I don't even remember the 4th one. He was up in Old Town. The 19th Maine is where Robert Morrow enlisted to. And he went into federal service the middle of August 62. He didn't get out until the war had ended on the 31st of May, 1865. Now, this is a case study of how the VA was brand new during and after this war. Togus, that you often hear about, was the very first VA facility. It was intended more for an old folks' home, old soldiers' home, than it was acute medical care. Today, you can't get a room to be old in. It's all acute medical. So Robert went off with the 19th, which formed in Bath, the town of Bath. And he ended up under the command of Captain Daniel Dickey. Now I'm going to tell you a little aside about Daniel Dickey. Daniel, when he joined the war, had already been married to one woman who gave him 8 kids and then died. I think he probably exhausted her. He married a second time and she gave him 4 kids. The last 2 were born after the war. Daniel Dickey's buried on the Cape in Stockton. But when the regiment formed, Company E elected him to be captain. And they went through one battle after another until they got to Gettysburg. And I haven't found all the circumstances, but Daniel Dickey had to have been wounded because he resigned after Gettysburg. And officers were allowed and even expected to do that if they'd gotten banged up. So he resigned and came home. He had 2 sons, that first marriage, that turned out to be sea captains. One of them was Isaac Dickey. Isaac married Harriet Mudgett, Stockton girl. He owned a ship, and I believe it was harbored here in Searsport. And on one of their trips, he and the very pregnant Mrs. Dickey set out for Hong Kong. When they got there and put anchor down, shortly thereafter, she went into labor. And they couldn't get her to a hospital. They couldn't get a doctor to her. So another captain, Blanchard, from Searsport, who had delivered all his own children, came aboard and delivered the baby. whose name was Clara, and then Blanchard, picked up his name, Clara Blanchard Dickey. Now, she was born the 4th of June, 1876. It only gets better from here. Eventually, they come back to Stockton. She spends some time here. Thank you. Spent a little time here. The ship and the operation moved to Boston. The ship and operation moved to New York. In New York, she's now old enough that she got involved in Broadway and did real well. And then got the attention of somebody in Hollywood. Next thing you know, she's off in Hollywood. In the end of things, she starred in over 150 pictures that she's been credited with a stage name, not Clara Blanchard Dickey, but Clara Blandick. And you know her as Auntie M from The Wizard of Oz. Oh, I love that reaction. She was 63 when they filmed that in 1939. She lived, I think it was to 85, and took her own life in 1962. She had rheumatism and arthritis, and she had pain constantly and could not bear it any longer. So that's the Company E of the 19th Maine. And my great-great-granddad, Robert, is right in that same battle in Gettysburg on the 3rd day, 3rd of July, 1863. And they had 4 of the companies of the 19th in front of our cannon. We had 80 cannon lined up. Trouble was, the rebels had 126 cannon on the other side pointed at them. And I guess a heck of a cannonade took place. In the process, not only did Daniel Dickey get wounded, great-great-granddad took a bullet to the leg, a bullet that they never could recover. He took damage to the head, and oddly enough, between these 2 lines of cannons, he ended up with what I call tinnitus, buzzing in the ear. And I can tell you right now what happened later. He had PTSD, had to. He was married to a woman named Farley. I think it's somebody he picked up in Danvers, Mass. And she's my, of course, great-great-grandmother. He got back to, he ran the whole war right up to 1865 with that unit, with that bullet in his leg, with his head damaged. They went through, after 1864, they went through the battles of Cold Harbor, Petersburg Siege, Appomattox Courthouse. They were at the and Battle of the Wilderness, big one. But on the 9th of April, 1865, he was present at the Appomattox Courthouse when Lee surrendered. Would love to have been there. Now he applied, now we're back to the VA. He applied for an invalid pension due to the right leg, which is now disabled and atrophied. The head wound, as well as rheumatism, disease of the heart, chronic piles, diarrhea, loss of teeth, and deafness. It took them 7 years to put that claim through, and they finally did. He picked up senility while he was waiting. His doctor certified he was unable to earn his support by manual labor. He eventually died of cancer of the stomach and prostate. Now, he had to be tougher than a boiled owl. As all of this is going on and they're not giving him a custard thing to live on, he took the bootlegging whiskey into the Indian Territory and got arrested. And when my daughter Leslie told me that, she called me, I was in Alaska then. I had gotten done being a cop in Eskimo country. And one of the things I was known for was busting bootleggers. I even got the high mayor's father. Magistrate said, well, this has been long overdue, and I got it. So the wheel turned all the way. They arrested him for that, and there's letters in his file at the National Archive from the U.S. Marshal's Office wanting to know the whereabouts of this character because he'd skipped bail. But remember, senility is setting in too. So he was a tough man, obviously. He served and got wounded badly. And he was also a character as well. I've looked at Searsport soldiers besides Robert, and I don't know how many names you've got on your memorial, but I see 162 in one database. Now, I'll tell you what I've done with Stockton. I started years ago looking at Civil War soldiers, and it's a major learning curve to find out where you can find this information without going to the National Archives and pulling the jacket on everybody. And I had planned to do that, but then they shut down due to COVID. So recently, Bonnie Vimeo is here from Frankfort Historical Society. She's asked me to help her society try to get an accurate list of the combatants out of Frankfort. And for instance, she has a list of 80 men that Frankfort is aware of that served. I've already got a list of about 126. And so we're squaring that, and they're getting ready to do a public monument with names. So I have not done the same thing with Searsport. If I were to start with Searsport, I'd be a good year trying to get through it. I'd like to do that after I get done with Frankfort. And if I do that, then I need to work with you on what do you know? What list do you have? Because the one I have comes from a national database, and that doesn't mean it's so. Pretty accurate, but it doesn't mean it's so. One of the other fellows that was part Searsport, part Stockton, was another great-great-granddaddy. This is the Ellis line. That's my mom's maiden name. Her father's grandfather, William Ellis, was in the fight, went through the first Battle of Bull Run and then some other action. The second Battle of Bull Run, his luck ran out and a bullet took his leg, and he had to have it amputated. Now, he had a farm after that happened on the Harris Road in Stockton, but he also was very tied in with Searsport. And in fact, he's buried at Elmwood Cemetery. And the story I love to tell about that is that after he lost the leg and he came home, they allowed him to re-enlist one leg in all, in the Veterans Volunteer Regiment. And I don't know if he sharpened pencils or what he did. I don't know how long he was in. But I do know that when he applied for a pension, which he obviously was entitled to, the VA wrote him a letter. And I have a copy that I took to my very next VA appointment that says that he needed to prove that he was still an amputee. I was still in Alaska, and I said, Leslie, ship me a copy of that. And the next appointment, I snapped that up, and I said, some things never change. Well, and it is a funny story, but about 2 years ago, I heard that they did the same thing to a guy fighting in Afghanistan who came back with a leg missing. And that's a rare thing. And I do want to tell you that when I entered the VA system in 1973, it was abysmal. But I was a Vietnam veteran, and that was a hospital at Togus' gig for World War II. And what's happened recently, last 5-6 years, World War II guys were dying at the rate of 1,000 a day. And all of a sudden, the VA, whose funding depends on how many men they're taking care of, the VA principals figured out, ooh, we better be good to the guys from Korea and Vietnam because we're losing our power base. And today, I'll tell you what, if I have a 10 o'clock appointment from my doc, they have me in that office 5 minutes to 10. And they're very competent, very good to deal with. Not always the case in the past. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about the monetary system they were all fighting. On the table here, I've got 3 silver coins you can look at later from 1851, 52, 53. And it happened to be what I could afford to bid on at one of Mark Bradstreet's auctions. Probably 3 of Mark Bradstreet's auctions. I think I got them one at a time. The little 3-cent pieces, they're made out of silver. What happened in 1861, first thing that happened, was the government realized that they'd called up all of these regiments. They're going to have to pay these guys. And they're going to have to buy guns and artillery and pontoon bridges and you name it. And feed and clothe. So the United States, for the second time in history, started printing money. And they printed $50 million in greenbacks. But the first round of greenbacks were demand notes. And that means that you could take them to the bank and get gold or silver, particularly gold. That didn't last long. In the end, they printed $450 million in greenbacks. A few months into the greenback, they passed a law called the Legal Tender Act, making it so a greenback, which was backed by nothing, was legal tender for all, it's on our dollars now, legal tender for all debts, public and private. And the trouble with these greenbacks was that you couldn't trade in for gold. So in other words, it was paper. It only worked because people agreed to let it work. those greenbacks, the war ended in 1865, those greenbacks had wildly fluctuating values compared to gold if you could buy gold with it. And the result was the average person, by the middle of the war in 1863, the price of flour had doubled. Bacon went from $1.25 a pound to $10. Sugar increased 15 times in price. Coffee increased 40 times. Because they were buying, first of all, two things. They flooded the country with money supported by nothing. But they had all this money washing through the country. So people had the greenback, and they could and would spend more than usual for commodities. But the other thing is, those greenbacks didn't even represent an earning. Somebody didn't grind coffee and sell it. It was just, here it is. Now, even at that rate, they only financed about 15% of the war with funny money. Now, do you remember the old saying, not worth a continental? They had done this in the Revolutionary War. They printed continental money, and they didn't have any description for the back because they didn't print the back. They just they took paper and just printed these funky notes and expected people to trade with it. And the Continental really lost a lot of value, what you could buy with the Continental. It took until 1878, 13 years after the war, until they had thinned out some of the money, some of the greenback that was issued, and the greenback was at par with gold. And then they kept taking it away and taking it away. Let me ask you, Mark, have you ever handled a greenback?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And fractional currency, which was printed during the Civil War, because all the small change was hoarded.
Well, the other thing that happened as they were flooding the market with funny money, the people knew it was funny money. They knew their stuff in those days, and nobody would go to the store with copper, silver, or gold. Nobody. So if bacon was $1.25 and you had 2 greenbacks, you went to the store, how were you going to get 75-cent change? Postage stamps. Now I've got a couple pages of postage stamps that were issued after 1861 here, and God knows that I've only got 3. They might have been change at one time before they were actually used to carry the mail. So it wasn't until about 1878 that the greenback got parity and they started to loosen up the coins in their pocket. Now that's described universally as Gresham's law. Bad money will drive good money out every time. Another example of that many of us lived through, 1965, they started coining dimes and quarters clad. In other words, they took the 90% silver coin, discontinued it, and gave us funny money. A quarter, if you melt a quarter down, it might be worth 1.5 cents in metal today. But if you try to buy a quarter on eBay, you're going to pay a quarter $5 for it because of the silver content. So in '65, people began to keep the 64 and earlier, keep that back and just spend the clad money if you knew what you were doing. Danny Harrison over in Stockton tells about working at Jack a Dock. And between boats or between shifts, they'd have a poker game going all the time. And he said there was one fellow, somebody last name of Marathu, probably related to old Jack, that would come with a pocket full of quarters. And if anybody threw a quarter in that was 64 or earlier, he would lift it out and replace it with one of the new devalued. And that's Gresham's Law happening right there. We got the same thing going on today, except now it's trillions, and we got a war. Now let's talk about some of the Stockton happenings, Civil War, that I think are fascinating. I mentioned Albert Richardson. He joined the Coast Guard Infantry early 1864 and stayed in until the middle of '65. After the war, the shooting had stopped. He enlisted as a seaman from Stockton. Some few years later, married a gal in Danvers, Mass. He goes on to New York, and 5th of November, 1872, he's the first mate on the Mary Celeste. Does that mean anything to anybody? Rusty got it. Mary Celeste is the most famous ghost ship ever. They took off on the 5th of November, 1872. They have 1,701 barrels of alcohol on board. It does not specify if that's to drink or be used for industry. On the 4th of December, a month later, Mary Celeste is discovered drifting. Sails set, but getting a little ragged, and it's halfway between the Azores and Portugal. The captain of the ship that found it, was familiar with Mary Celeste captain and the ship. He knew it didn't look right. He came up alongside, got a boarding party on board, and there they found nobody left on the ship. The last log entry was 10 days prior. No people. The rescue dinghy is gone. The equipment they used to put down in the hole to find out how much water's in is laying right beside one of the hatch covers. The hatches are sealed except for 2 on either end, and the captain's watch is hanging by his bed. For all the world, it looked like they got spooked and fled. And there's all kinds of theories about what happened. There's books, there's movies. That thing was recovered and taken back, I believe it was England, and eventually sold, and one of the guys that bought it grounded it years later off Haiti on an insurance scam. And as far as I know, that wreck is still there. But that was Albert Richardson, survived the war and lost it with the Mary Celeste. A couple other things. I mentioned my great-granddaddy, William Ellis. He came from a family of a lot of kids, 5 of which were boys. He was one of them. His brother, Crawford Ellis, and he joined the 2nd Maine at the same time. Excuse me. Crawford, his brother, was the first Stockton casualty. He died 2 months into the war at the Battle of Hanover Courthouse. He had to be one of Maine's early casualties. He had another brother, Walter T., who joined the Federal Army as opposed to 2nd Maine or whatever. He survived the war. He had a brother Wilbert Ellis that was a sea captain by trade. He was in the Navy for 2 years. He got out, and I don't know what he was thinking. He got into a cavalry outfit and ended up getting taken prisoner of war, spent 9 months at Libby and Bell POW camps, and survived. It's amazing anybody survived those. And according to the story of Stockton Springs, he was known to regale people at gatherings in Stockton with stories of the torture they put him through. And I get every reason to believe it was a real story. We had a family, Rule and Mariah Gray, lived on the Green Valley Road in Stockton. They had 4 sons and 1 daughter. 2 of the boys, like my family, 2 of the boys went away early together, same unit. One of them, Robert, buried the other one. Sewell Gray died at Fredericksburg. And Robert kept a diary. And the diary entry that day said, "Today we buried Maddie." And if they ever publish that diary, I hope that'll be the title. Augustus Gray was wounded at Fredericksburg. He died 13th of December, 62. Robert, the diary keeper, died at the Battle of Wilderness. 4 boys, 1 came home. He became a cop in Boston. He arrested somebody, and his precinct wouldn't take the prisoner. They thought the charges really weren't worthy of an arrest, so he started shopping precincts to park this prisoner. And when nobody would take the guy, he quit. He had to have had PTSD to lose judgment like that. Corporal Franklin Patterson was wounded at Gettysburg, and they sent him to a hospital in York, Virginia. The hospital wing award elected him to be the representative when Lincoln gave the Gettysburg Address. So we were favored with that. One of the things I'm extremely proud of is we had 3 men, and I may find another 1 or 2, Lewis Mudgett, William Mudgett, and Cassius Clay Roberts, that I'm at 40 minutes. Holy Toledo. I'm near the end. All 3 of them left their enlistment and took commissions and took charge of colored troops. Not a terribly popular posting. But by golly, 3 of our guys stepped up and did that. We had 3 POWs, the great-great-uncle I told you about, a guy named Warren Griffin who kept a diary, and I haven't seen it yet, and this Robert Gray, whose diary is being posted on the Stockton Historical Facebook page every day. So if it was the 11th of April in 1863, that's what gets posted. That posting will stop when he gets to the wilderness in 64. I need to stop. My wife said so. But I'll be here after, and I didn't mention this runaway inflation. Anybody's heard of the Weimar Republic and the problems they had? I've got 5 pages of Weimar Republic stamps here that shows that they went from 5 pfennig for a postage stamp up to billions of dollars or marks. I've got the coins. I've got a Facebook page to show off on Robert Gray and the postage stamp. Thank you. Questions after.